Hi, everybody. Welcome to Coffee Retail Summit. My name is Vicente Partida, and I am the Community Experience Officer at the Specialty Coffee Association. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you Jessica Warden. Jessica is the head of coffee at Gale's Bakery. Gale's opened in London's Hampstead High Street in 2005 and now has 79 bakeries. Jessica is an authorized SCA trainer, a Q grader, most well known for leading Gale's Bakery to define good coffee in the hearts and minds of neighborhoods across London and surrounding areas. She is passionate about building inclusive culture, celebrating craft, and creating opportunities for personal development through coffee. In her role as head of coffee at Gale's, she focuses on sustainable business growth strategies to scale and celebrate specialty coffee. Jessica fundamentally believes that the specialty coffee industry can be a vehicle for local and global change. Jessica, welcome to Coffee Retail Summit. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Vicente. It's such an amazing opportunity to talk about what we do. So let me just pull up my slides.
Sure. Okay. We're going to hear from Jessica now, and we'll come back for a Q&A session. For those of us joining us online, drop your questions for Jessica in the chat. Make sure you're at retail.sca.coffee. And Jessica, take it away.
Well, thank you. So let me just start. We're here today to talk about scaling for good. So I've been with Gale's for 12 years now. I started when we had 3 bakeries, and this week we'll open our 80th bakery in the Baker Street area in London. So let's just start. We're all here to talk about making good coffee. It's that goal that we all aspire to, and is fundamental to our strategies around scaling. When Gale started over 15 years ago, it was with a mission to return the handcrafted sourdough bread to communities in London. And as part of that journey, Gale's has also embraced coffee. Coffee is fundamentally linked to how we approach craft, how we celebrate it in our bakeries. And, you know, we've all come to specialty coffee by one avenue or another. And our love of specialty coffee centers around the quality that it represents. Flavor, the diversity, its potential for good, as well as the experience of drinking it at home with friends, in cafes. Now, when I was thinking about how to talk about scaling for good, the first thing I reflected on was my first experience as a barista. I had an opportunity to work in a cafe in Rotterdam that had won a grant and had award-winning design features. It was a real first for the coffee shop industry in Holland at the time. The design focused on creating a really comfortable environment for customers, kind of replicating the feel of a living room. And while it was incredibly exciting to be part of that, and I had a huge responsibility for not just the technical execution of what I was doing, but also for facilitating a really great experience for the people who were visiting us. At the same time, there were things that didn't quite work. I didn't feel comfortable. And looking back, there was a lot of things about the space that didn't really consider the people working in it. And because that wasn't taken into consideration, it was hard for us to embody the same level of comfort and also extend that experience to the people who were visiting us. And there were so many things about it that created barriers within the space between the barista and the customer. And looking back on it, this wasn't just a design issue. There was something fundamentally missing in the thinking and conceptualization of the cafe experience as a whole. So this leads me to scaling for good, like thinking back on that experience, there was something really missing, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then years later, when I had this opportunity to start redefining what coffee was for Gales, I started looking at our mission. So Gales started with a real mission to return handcrafted sourdough to the high streets of the UK, specifically starting in London. And scale has always been a part of what we do, because we fundamentally believe that by bringing better quality products to more and more people, we are impacting food systems and supply chains for good. Scaling creates an opportunity to share better coffee and better bread with a much wider audience. And for us, good means high quality ingredients, carefully sourced and prepared with care. In this sense, scaling for good means scaling to sustain and support quality. And when we were looking at this journey of how we'd go about it, we didn't see a lot of models, existing models of how you could scale specialty coffee in a bakery business. We could see lots of coffee businesses that were scaling coffee with differing levels of success, but nothing that really reflected our business and what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to keep craft and quality at the center of everything that we did. And the lack of existing models presented an amazing opportunity to define how growth for us would work. And if I look at early discourse on specialty coffee, a lot of it focused on sustainable sourcing, fair pricing, and the quality of the product. Really important topics, but none that completely tackled what we were about as a business that made coffees by baristas for customers every day. It was clear to us how our sourcing ethos supported our desire to scale for good. We've had a partnership with Union Hand Roasted Coffee for since the beginning, and they have a fantastic ethical sourcing program that's won numerous awards. So we're good there. And at the beginning of our journey, we had amazing roots, but there was something missing from our foundation. And when I look back on my initial role as a barista when I started with Gales, I saw a lot of similar problems to what I had experienced in Holland. So the understanding of bar design hadn't quite evolved to where it is today. But also the definition of what a barista was or could be didn't quite exist in the same way. And if I looked at the wider industry around me, I felt quite limited. I felt like a lot of the examples that I had around me were very exclusionary. I didn't feel a part of it, and I didn't see myself or the people I worked with represented in that. And so it was really clear to me that baristas required much greater consideration in this journey towards growth. How could we, as a business, create a coffee culture that was inclusive, diverse, sustainable? So baristas create quality. Good coffee is all about quality. And quality doesn't exist in specialty coffee without people to sustain it. We know what quality is, what it tastes like, what it feels like, and our customers do too. Although sometimes the definition may differ, an experience of quality really manifests through baristas. Baristas bring it to life for customers every day, tailing individual cups of coffee, from your latte, your flat white, your espresso, even filter. They tailor these drinks and experiences to the expectations of hundreds of people who walk through the door. And even thinking back to growing up in the States, in Southern California, where coffee shop culture was really really embedded and part of the experience. This is going back to the 90s. I was just thinking about the independent cafes that we would hang out at, and it was like this massive melting pot of, teenage goths, punks, artists, local professionals. They were just total melting pots for the local community. And I don't really remember what the coffee tasted like. I just remembered the experience of what it was like to be there and the people that I met there. To be successful at scale, to sustain quality, and to sustain scaling as a business, we needed to move beyond defining quality in terms of coffee itself, the reputation of the roaster is purchased from, because ultimately, quality starts and stops with the barista. A customer's definition of quality quite often has very little to do with all of the work that a business will invest in to ensure quality. The experience ultimately lands with the barista. So we believe that good coffee, quality coffee, honors the craft of the producer, roaster, and barista. Coming to this definition for our business was absolutely crucial because it placed the barista back in the value chain. It was no longer about just the producer or just the roaster or just the consumer. It's very much placing the barista back within that value chain, because ultimately for a lot of end consumers, the customers we encounter in our bakeries every day, their definition of quality is fully defined by the barista. And when we started out, we had invested in good quality machines and had passionate people. But what we lacked was an internal culture around coffee, a culture that embraced coffee with the same amount of care and attention as our bread. So the challenge for us to create sustainable scale, but also to scale for good, was to bring this point of view into practice. How do we as a business honor the craft of the barista? So we not only had to define barista craft for our business, we had to understand how to bring this to life for our teams. So what I'd like to go through over the next bit of what I'm sharing today is to talk about the pillars that sustain our aspiration to create good quality coffee and to scale for good. So our first pillar is how we develop our baristas. Baristas are at the heart of our growth. When I started out in coffee, there weren't a lot of resources that structured how to make coffee. There were a few blogs, videos weren't really accessible at that time. There might be one or two, and a lot of what you learned was by watching the people that you worked with who were more experienced. And some of it was based on fact, and some of it was just people trying stuff out. And if it worked, it worked. It was almost like throwing spaghetti on the wall. The thing is, though, craft can't exist without training. consistent, accessible, meaningful learning. Learning that deepens understanding and respect for the ingredients and equipment. And so at the outset of this journey for Gales, we identified that really embracing training and making that the backbone of our coffee culture was the most important way that we could really put baristas at the heart of our growth. By giving our teams access to knowledge and elevating the content year in, year out, along with evolutions and technical and theoretical understanding that was happening in the industry anyways, but also standardizing that knowledge. Our training program has gone through so many different iterations: one-to-one training on-site, one-to-one training off-site, 6 people to a course off-site. Everything has been very much focused, regardless of how it manifested, on elevating and sustaining craft, as well as the barista's own understanding of their profession as a craft. I once had someone say to me that it was a really risky thing that we were doing, because our training program was actually providing our teams a skill set that they wouldn't use day to day. There was almost a suggestion that we were overtraining people. And I was really shocked at the time. And what I realized was, what was very different about what we were trying to achieve at Gales is we wanted people to have this level of understanding, because that is what sustains engagement. That is what creates validation, and also gives people a clear sense of development. We weren't just training the baristas of the present. We were creating a culture for the future. Where we've gotten to now is such an exceptional place. If I look at our journey 12 years ago when we started looking at our coffee program, our head baristas now train all of the teams who come into the bakery. They have accountability for the development of the people around them. They have access to professional certification through the SCA Barista Skills program. But they also lead as leaders in their individual bakeries. And this is fundamentally different, but also crucial for scalability of any business that's quality focused. When you're scaling a business, you hear a lot of noise about competition. And some businesses are very nervous about competition. And when I think about our teams, we've always sustained their growth through hosting internal competitions. We want to create sustainable cultures that celebrate craft and quality. And when I think about being in competition, I actually think about being in competition with yourself, not others. Every time Gales opens in a neighborhood, specialty cafes, eateries, restaurants are soon to follow. Our aim is to inspire those around us to do better and to be better in what they do. And the competition mindset within our business for our baristas is very much focused on constantly striving to do better, to be better, and to also bring your colleagues and customers on that journey. Another fundamental pillar, of course, is our coffee. The quality of what we work with is integral to what we do. What I wanted to talk about here is actually how our approach to product is maybe slightly different, has slightly different commercial strategy. We had built our internal training program to a point where we were quite well known in our neighborhoods with great quality coffee, and for a lot of people we were and continue to be a go-to destination. And as we got to that point, we knew it was time to evolve our coffee offer. So what we focused on actually was building a custom blend, which is not new. Lots of business do this. But what was different about this approach is we developed it with our customers and our baristas in mind. So not just something that suited our range and complemented the lovely food that we produce, and the croissants, other baked goods, cakes, bread, but that also considered the barista. And as the blend has evolved, this is six years ago, decision making around how the blend has evolved really focused and considered consistency, performance at the bar, as well as complexity. And that was held hand in hand with preserving and evolving the quality that our customers know and love. Gales has always approached all of our supplier relationships as partnerships. We choose to work with smaller craft producers and support them to grow with us. This includes our crockery, which is stoneware that's locally produced, our barista milk. We work quite closely with the Braids family in Lancashire, but also with Union Hand Roasted Coffee. And we really value the quality and expertise that they bring. Their expertise and craftsmanship deepen our own. However, sourcing the right ingredients isn't just led by taste, ethics, sustainability. It has to be done with our teams foremost in our minds. And this is absolutely a commercial strategy, because ultimately your teams are the ones who are tasting your coffee day in, day out. Our baristas are what make our coffee good. We can do the work behind the scenes to make sure that the Q grade is right and the roast is on point. But if it doesn't engage our teams, then how will it taste good for our customers? So this is an additional consideration when we're looking at our range as a whole and how to move things forward, how to consider things for our teams. Okay. Our communities. As you may be aware, the UK has had several lockdowns over the past 2 years, where hospitality businesses have been forced to close. Gales is in a unique position because we're a bakery. So during the pandemic, we pivoted and ensured that people had access to bread as well as essential ingredients that were scarce or hard to get in supermarkets. And because we were a bakery, we were able to remain open, but we also felt a real duty to make sure that people had access to bread. And when we were thinking about our coffee in context, we understood that coffee is so much more than a product. While it certainly doesn't have the same nutritional value as good quality bread, it brings something else. And the past 2 years really brought to light the experience element of coffee and how fundamental that is to the exchange between a barista and the customer. So we had always worked with a community focus. We've always tried to create environments for our teams to engage with customers And I can think when I was a barista, like it was fantastic. We had these really amazing opportunities to exchange with customers, but it was more of a thing that was fun and kept the job engaging. And I think we didn't fully understand the power of what we do until we were one of the few businesses where people could go to get out of their house. And coffee was a real central point in that. And so I just wanted to share some feedback that we received. We are very lucky to have an incredibly responsive customer base who share a lot of feedback, sometimes really positive, sometimes not so good, to help us improve. And what we saw over the course of the pandemic was an overwhelming need from our communities to have a social meeting point or an opportunity for social exchange. So this is from our West Hampstead bakery. I would just like to write to say how welcoming and friendly Antoine is. I am in my 60s and he is always reassuring and friendly and remembers my order when I forget. I look forward to my morning coffee and a chat. Without his daily support, lockdown would have been a lot more lonely. So many people were incredibly isolated during this period, and it was so incredible to witness the impact that we could have in people's lives through something as simple as making a cup of coffee. This cafe changed my life during the winter lockdown. Now, this lockdown was probably one of the most difficult because it was quite a cold winter. So you could really only go outside and meet people for about an hour in green spaces. They, the Willesden Green Bakery, have become such a hub of the community, and friendship from all the staff was amazing. The coffee was consistently great and brownies addictive, but more than anything else, just the human interaction and generosity is something I will always be grateful for. You really have something special here. And I really have to agree. This is an incredibly crucial pillar to scaling for good, but also sustaining quality. All right, sustaining craft. So this is definitely the bit that I find really exciting at the moment. This is where we see the most innovation. Craft and technology have to work hand in hand. Technology should be serving the development of craft. A lot of the dilemmas that we've run into as a business are based on our success. We have incredible demand for what we do. And I'm just thinking back to Kim Elena describing having to work alone because during quite big peaks and troughs in service. Our challenge is that we have really lengthy peaks. How do you sustain quality when you have huge demand? So a lot of what we focused on over the past few years is quite carefully innovating our equipment and investing in kit that would allow us to partially automate what we do. Nothing designed to reduce the level of skill required to execute the job. It's not about, making things less interesting for baristas. It's all about making it easier for them to do their job well. So in this picture, you can see puck presses, automating tamping, which is super crucial. I still have, wrist injuries from when I started as a barista. We started working with Victoria Arduino as well to customize the E1 machine, so we're able to partially automate our milk production, which is another area where we're just seeing some really tremendous strides forward. Because ultimately, when you're trying to scale for good, the environment that you create for your baristas is as important as the training and the product. The equipment needs to serve them in their role, and it also needs to be suitable for the demand. Okay. So, scaling for good. So scaling for good is all about scaling for impact, creating sustainable structures and cultures that celebrate craft and craftspeople, coffee and baristas. Here's a few things I would love for you to take as takeaways from today. Invest in your teams, educate them and support their growth. This is how you create engagement with quality. Drive them to be in competition with themselves, not others, constantly seeking improvement through the validation they gain in their role and developing others. Design your range, your bars, your kit with people in mind, because people are the ones making and also consuming it, right? And seek to elevate the experience through ingredient execution and environment. Understand and value the exchange between the barista and the customer. Seek out ways to support and sustain this. And also constantly review what you do and how you do it. Technology can and should sustain craft. Scaling for good means that we are constantly scaling quality. We need to constantly consider and interrogate the role of the barista and how it is integral to solving this dilemma. And for Gales, the answer seems to be that you can only do this through people. Thank you very much.
All right, Jessica, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Stay with us. Stay with us. We have a few questions here from the audience. I wanted to ask you first. We've got quite a few really interesting questions here, but I wanted to sort of go back a little bit to the beginning. You've been at Gales for over 12 years, almost 12 years. You started as a barista. You moved on to barista trainer, coffee training manager, and you're now the head of coffee. So you've been part of this business, or the cafe part of the business, for over the past decade, where you've seen incredible growth from. Oh,
sorry.
Supposed to happen. So you've been part of the business over the past decade as it's seen incredible growth. What do you remember about those early days?
How hard it was. I mean, in a lot of ways, it hasn't gotten any easier. I think it was also like really always seeking answers and improvement. And I feel like where we're at now, we have a lot of the answers, and we also have support systems to kind of really facilitate quick learning. So, you know, where you're struggling with the grinder, or you don't know why the espresso doesn't taste as it should. And where we're at now is we figured all that out, and we can also provide like easy access to those resources, because I don't think people have changed. Like, I think a lot of the time when you're doing a job, you want to do it well. You spend so much time doing it, and the best feedback you can get is from a customer. And so anything that you can put in place to kind of sustain that positive feedback loop is just absolutely crucial.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That reminds me of the two testimonials that you shared. I had seen your slides before, and I had read those, but but when you read them out loud just now, it really hit me. I was like fighting back tears, especially on the first one that you read. I have memories of going to Gales at Exmouth Market with a dear friend of mine at the end of, I want to say it was the first lockdown. And we met there once a week, and we would go to Gales, and it was our little ritual for weeks and weeks and weeks. I would tell them there are other cafes, as you said, when Gales comes to town, other businesses pop up on the same street. And there were quite a few new cafes, smaller cafes in the area. And I said, let's try this other one. And he said, I like Gales. I've tried Gales and I like Gales. I don't want to try anything else. And so that became our ritual. So that really was a nice memory. Thank you for sharing those testimonials. I read somewhere the Gale CEO, Tom Molnar, said he was talking about sort of how Gales came about. And he was talking about the early days before the chain of cafes, about the bread factory in the early days of what eventually became Gales. And he said back then, we created a culture where the bakers are kings, right? Talking about the bread factory. I wonder how that ethos sort of informed how you approached the coffee program at Gales.
Yeah, 100%. I think so much of it was driven by a desire to improve quality. And when I started on this, it was very much at the beginning of my journey as well. So I just knew that everyone really wanted to make great coffee, and I wanted everyone to make great coffee, and we worked with good quality. So it was just a question of how do we put that into practice. I have a background in the arts, and I was so lucky with my degree program that I was able to learn a lot of craft skills, and I could see how a similar approach would really sustain that.
Let's have a look here at the questions from the audience. There was one here that I thought was particularly interesting, and I'm going to read it verbatim. But the question is, how do you grow your barista team leads? Is there a shelf life to a barista in general, in your view? Reading it verbatim. So what do you think of that, Jessica?
Well, as a woman in her 40s, I don't like to talk about shelf life. So how do we grow them? We've always focused on like a structured program with trainings that support knowledge growth, and then asking the individual to demonstrate that. So it's a combination of trainings and a really rigorous quality control program. There's such a huge development culture in the wider business. We don't really tend to recruit for senior roles. Our preference is to grow people internally. So on the one hand, for some people, there is a limitation around how long they would like to work behind the bar. And also in London specifically, you have a different pool of people, usually people who have moved to London because they are seeking to progress their career. We have bakeries in the areas surrounding London in the southeast. And so we tend to see a mix of people who really just love working behind the bar. And then the challenge to us is, how do we make that interesting? How do we support continuous growth? So on the one hand, yes, I guess for some people, there is a limitation around how long they want to work behind the bar because there are other things they'd like to be doing. But I think equally, you have to hold as a business and really support and sustain the people who do want to do that kind of work long term. And I think that balance is really important to achieve.
Right. There was another question from the audience that's related to what you just said. And I'll read it. I love all of this. Thanks, Jessica. On recruitment, how does Gales balance bringing in fresh, untrained humans to your barista program and recruiting experienced coffee people with new ideas?
We've always done a mix. I think because we're not as like a coffee business or a food and coffee business, we've always attracted a different type of barista. So people who really enjoy diversity in their role, they love being able to eat great food all day and drink good coffee. So we discovered really early on that our best baristas and the people who also really buy into what we're about and are really engaged with our mission around scaling coffee are the individuals who start with us with no skills. So our training program has allowed us always allowed us a lot of flex on supporting people to develop internally, as well as a mix of recruiting experienced teams. But if I look at our 85 head baristas that we currently have in the business, I would say probably about six to 10 of them have been recruited externally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so most of them are developed internally. Also, inclusion, it has been a really huge driver, I think for me personally, and to see how I could really positively impact coffee culture in that way. And so what you also tend to see is we have a 50-50 split of women baristas and or women head baristas, so people who actually lead coffee in the bakery, as to men baristas, head baristas.
Okay. You mentioned early in your presentation the idea of creating melting pots for the local coffee community, for the local community, I should say. And there was a brief memory that you shared of what the 1990s was like,
Yeah.
and the people that you met at these places. Tell us a little bit more about that, because that was a
Yeah, well, I
particular
mean,
time.
I'm a recovering goth. Yeah, I mean, I think the US is really specific because, you have a lot of limitations around access to venues, because if they're serving, you're not allowed in until you're 21. So in the 90s, there's a real divide between coffee shops that you could go to that would be open late, and bars which you couldn't access. And so there was always like this real mix of people because it served so many different needs. And I think it was also, it was 4th Street in Long Beach, which is quite artsy, still is today. And I think that melting pot happened because there was like literally nowhere else for people to go. And I think if you look at Gales during the pandemic, it's the same thing. There was literally nowhere else for people to go, or their options were really limited. And I think because we were so strong as a business and we had a real mission behind what we were doing, that sustained our teams during what was an incredibly frightening, unstable time.
Oh, yeah.
And that fed through to what we were able to offer to the local community.
I love that. I love that. I noticed that you didn't quite say this term, but there's a big the thread in your presentation of what is value to you. Of course, craft is is in there, but it's essentially about customer service too, right? And just what a difference that makes. Yeah.
Yeah, I avoid that term just because I feel it just gets bandied around a lot, and so when you say, like, when you talk about a coffee experience or an exchange, it really brings to life what is actually happening
Right.
when you're serving a customer. And maybe that's just because I've been in hospitality for so long, but I just feel like it's lost its value and its meaning, and a real understanding of how powerful it can be.
I hear you. Jessica, thank you so much. It's been a great presentation. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right. So, Jessica, thank you very much for your presentation. That wraps up the first session of Coffee Retail Summit. We will be back with session 2 in just a minute. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions for Jessica. If I didn't get to your question, I promise I will pass them on to her. We'll be back in just a minute. Say hi in the chat. I'll see you there.